We have clearance, Clarence.
Roger, Roger. What's our vector, Victor?
Howard radio clearance, over.
That's Clarence, over. Over.
Roger.
Huh?
Hello and welcome to Dots, Lines, and Destinations, episode 86. It's July 9th, 2015. I'm Stephen Seagraves, joined today by Seth Miller. Hey, Seth.
Hello, hello, hello.
Doing well?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Hanging out in a hotel in Waukesha, Wisconsin. So, you know.
Waukesha. Do they have cheese there, by any chance? Lots of cheese?
They have lots of cheese. Lots of cheese.
Cheese curds also?
Cheese curds, cheese fries, anything you can think of with cheese.
Now, here's the thing. I know, like, Montreal is infamous for poutine, or maybe all of Quebec, really, which is cheese curds on fries with gravy. Is that something that's also popular in that part of the world? Because, you know, they've got all the cheese curds.
I don't know. I haven't seen it on any menus. There is some French background here, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, Wisconsin definitely was, I feel like, part of the French portion of what became the United States, sort of War of 1812 era kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean,
is that the right war where we threw out the French?
I think so. That, like Eau Claire, is a town here, so I have a feeling that there's some French influence.
Green Bay is definitely French.
It is.
Sure. Milwaukee, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what Milwaukee is.
Indian, I would imagine.
Yeah, I have to look up the name.
Native American. Sorry, I'm horribly politically incorrect.
I forgive you.
Yes, but will our listeners?
They're very unforgiving.
Yeah,
so.
I've noticed that about them, and yet they're still here. So go figure.
Today we're going to do a little talking about collusion. Some more Transcon talk.
Yeah, if we do the collusion, if we talk about collusion together, is that collusion?
Yeah.
I mean, we planned it in advance. We discussed it in private before we actually got into it in public. I think we colluded, Stephen.
Oh man, I'm not going to get sued, am I?
Think the DOJ will come after us?
They might.
Be about as effective as what they're going to get out of the airlines?
Maybe.
Which of us do you think is more culpable, you and me or the airlines?
Probably you and I.
Yeah, isn't that a scary thought?
And we're going to talk about a little bit of labor action with United and Cuba.
Yes.
I want to hear about your Cuba, a little more about Cuba if you've got some stories. And then SkyWest flying lower and slower, or lower and faster, that's an odd combo. We'll talk more about that one too. But first, in the collusion topic, this came out, I guess, middle of last week.
Yep.
That the DOJ is looking into United, Delta, American, and Southwest, I believe, for collusion in their capacity on routes. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, and so basically the concern is that the four biggest airlines in the U.S., which control roughly 80% of the seats, are basically colluding, coordinating their actions, and signaling each other to not increase capacity so as to ensure that they all continue to profit.
Well, I mean, that's the secret, right?
Yeah. Supply demand. It's a real simple curve on this one. I don't know. It's an interesting complaint. Certainly I can understand, the frustration with fares are higher now than they have been for the past few years, and things like that. The hard part is, for it to really be collusion, that means they have to legitimately be coordinating, not changing things and not increasing, or increase. I guess they could be colluding to only increase certain amounts. One of the news stories I read about it basically suggested that the reason it might really be collusion is that during an investor conference in mid-June, Southwest indicated that it was probably going to raise capacity 7 to 8%, having previously said 6 to 7. And like the whole Wall Street community freaked the hell out and cut ratings on airline stocks and like literally sort of freaking out. And as part of that, Southwest, a couple days later reiterated the 7% number, and then things stabilized. And somehow that was the airlines working together to indicate that 7% is an acceptable number, or whatever the number may be is acceptable. I'm not even sure 7% is actually acceptable to Wall Street, but, here we are.
Yeah.
I don't know, to me, the biggest, confusion out of this, they've been doing this for more than a decade, right? We have quarterly earnings calls. We have monthly performance reports. We have all of these things that the airlines report all the time. And a lot of them include statements like, capacity is expected to grow or shrink X%. And they've been doing this forever. So if it's collusion, why is it only suddenly now a problem?
Yeah.
And it stinks from has the DOJ been ignoring it? DOJ, definitely DOJ. Have they just been ignoring it this long? And like, oh shit, we just noticed this? Like, someone got their head out of their ass finally? Or is it really not a problem and this is all politics?
Yeah, and so to me, one question I have is, if it's about capacity, like you're saying, and it's about, that those statements are publicly available.
Yep.
What they say, right? It's the same thing with fares then too, right? I mean, these airlines are looking at each other's fare filings in the evenings, I'm assuming, whenever they publish them. And they're going, hey, we're going to go close. We're going to go close to that fare.
They match them. I mean,
yeah, we'll match.
And let's be clear, like, officially no, but all the airlines signal each other through fare sales and various, hub-focused attacks and things like that, right? These are the fares we love. They're the ones that get us our cheap deals to random places.
Yep.
Right now there's hopefully it'll still be there when this airs in a couple days, but right now there's like a sub $600, maybe sub $500 tickets from the U.S., from United hubs to China, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Seoul, which is not in China. I know I screwed up some geography on the last episode. I'm really sorry, but I'm not that awful. And so, right, there's these crazy cheap fares. This is clearly Americans sending a signal to United about something. About, what is that specific signal? We obviously don't know, but like, American and United are having a little bit of a tiff over this sort of thing. And it happens all the time. And arguably it's in customers' favor, not bad for us. And then we have this sort of the question about the other side of it, the capacity constraints, and is that really collusion?
Yeah.
If they're talking about it all the time. I mean, to me, the biggest issue of all this, and it's something that I've been talking a little bit more about lately, even with airline executives, has been why all of a sudden are the airlines letting Wall Street run the companies?
Yeah, why the change of heart?
And it's not necessary. I mean, I know the answer to that. The answer to that is the people who run the companies get paid in stock options, and the only way the stock goes up is if they make Wall Street happy.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's a short answer to a long question, but if the DOJ is really upset with the way these things are being run, perhaps it's time to tell companies and that they're not supposed to sort of project out that level of detail in their full operations to the analysts. I don't know. And right, what other industry? Every industry has quarterly earnings calls. Every public company does, right?
Yep.
So all of them have, and I can't imagine. I mean, I only have listened to a few others, and the ones I've listened to have been, ancillary to the airline industry, mostly about, a go-go call or a Global Eagle call talking about connectivity stuff. But when I listen to those, they absolutely talk about performance in the past and where they expect to install new hardware and what they expect next quarter and next year's numbers to be. So it's sort of part of the tradition of Wall Street analysts. So all of a sudden is the DOJ saying like, that's not okay? Or are they saying they actually think there's separate sets of conversations going on elsewhere? I guess that's the real risk to the airlines, right? Are Delta executives emailing American executives and saying, hey, so, about Dallas, if you guys are willing to lay off at Atlanta a little bit, we'll fight Southwest for you over at Love Field. Like, I mean, it's just bizarre it's bizarre to me to think that anyone would be so stupid as to put something like that in writing.
Well, and let's remember too, though. I mean, the irony here is that the government approved
all these
mergers between the carriers, right? I mean, that's the ironic part, is that if there is capacity cuts, the government is complicit in some of that, right?
Sure. I mean, all of the airlines going into it said, no, we're going to maintain service levels, we're going to maintain flights to all these places, blah, 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 blah. And so, I mean, is the DOJ guilty of just like being stupid and believing them? I don't know. It's a bizarre scene.
Yeah, or maybe this is their way of going back and saying, well, you didn't keep your promise, and so now we're coming after you.
Yeah, that could be, but I think the DOJ will be hard pressed to find any evidence of this sort of communication between the airlines. I just don't think they're that stupid as airlines.
Yeah. I doubt people were writing this stuff in emails. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, you would have to be really, really stupid, and also like the IT organizations that run the airlines not monitoring for that sort of thing, because there would have to be all sorts of really, really bad things happening from a operational perspective for that to actually be true.
Yep.
And they're not actually all cutting capacity.
Well, Southwest is up in capacity, right?
Sure. And, I mean, trying to segue a little bit into the next topic, but look at the transcon market.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you've got people adding flights. You've got people upgauging their aircraft. Delta, right? That's the big news, is Delta's upgauging some of the JFK LA flights to 767s.
Yeah, and San Francisco's getting a few 767s, I believe.
I didn't even see that part.
I'll pull up the story again, but it's kind of crazy to sort of look at this and like, so why is it all of a sudden some of these routes are continuing to see competition, right? United is moving its service out of JFK on the transcons. So that's arguably sort of a cut, but not necessarily. And it'll be interesting to see just how that plays in terms of figuring out where sort of the total capacity for United between the East and West Coast comes out. But then sort of immediately following that, JetBlue announced they're going to increase flights, and Delta announced that they're going to both increase flights and capacity. And so it's a really interesting situation.
So, I mean, does this mean that the transcon market, specifically between JFK and San Francisco, LA, is stronger than the airlines are letting on?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily that the market is stronger.
Hello.
Yo,
hey, it's Foz.
There. Hello.
Hey.
How's it going?
Pretty good. You got us mid-call.
Oh, perfect.
So what are your thoughts?
Just
no, you think I'm going to make it that easy for you? You showed up late, man.
Shenanigans.
That's actually a completely fair answer to the question posed. Now, we're talking about transcons right now, revisiting that topic and sort of looking at where things are in terms of what's happening with the sort of cuts of United moving and then sort of is it really growing and how that's all playing out.
You know, it's interesting. I don't think it's really growing. I think this is going to be one of those examples where they just flood the market until everyone falls over. And, I mean, I'm sure you guys saw that Americans dropping first class from 2 of their JFK Heathrow flights, which to me says they're going to start probably trying to route less people through JFK now. So I wonder if that inventory is going to start drying up too now.
Well, it's interesting you raised that one, and it gets us. It's an interesting one, right? They had to do that to add Sydney because they don't have enough planes otherwise.
But did they? Right? They're running Heathrow to Miami and Dallas on 77W.
Right, and so they had to pick where they were going to do it, but they needed. I think part of that is that the 2 London flights. Gives them 2 planes, whereas Miami and especially Dallas are longer turn times. I'm not sure they get 2 full planes out of that.
Well, Miami, I think they could. Miami's not that much longer than JFK.
But the other part of that is they also have BA to backfill the first class demand, and they've got the JV.
Right, but that could be said of any airport.
BA's got way more service at JFK, way more frequencies. That's the only reason I think that one makes sense. You're right, BA has 2 a day to Miami and 1 a day to maybe Dallas. But,
yeah, I think it's 1 right now.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like that makes a little bit more sense. If you have to cut somewhere, I would cut that first.
I don't question that they're cutting it. I don't think that's my point at all. They're not going to be. I mean, there's no point in having 3 class transcon service for onward traffic. The only other places to go in the 3 class would be Sao Paulo from JFK because Buenos Aires is going 2 cabin.
Right.
So Sao Paulo is the only thing, but they have a nonstop LA Sao Paulo.
Yeah, so
are you suggesting then, Foz, that we're going to hear AA announce that their A321s are going to go to business class, no first class anymore?
Well, I don't think they're going to need 10 first class seats.
Yeah, but the other thing to think about there, Foz, is part of that, is any of that traffic still going onward to LA or LA, JFK, Heathrow anyways? Why wouldn't those people just be on the LA Heathrow nonstop or the San Fran Heathrow nonstops from BA?
Depends on timing sometimes. I mean, it could be any number of things. Inventory, right? LA Heathrow nonstops, they tend to fill up quicker than JFK Heathrow in first.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and, I've always questioned Americans' decision to have 10 first class seats on those A321s because I don't know if they actually sell 10 seats.
I would assume they don't.
Exactly. But they have a shortage of business class seats. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw 4 seats, 6 seats go away in lieu of 8 to 12 business class seats
That'd be an expensive retrofit.
Well,
I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it would be an expensive retrofit.
Just because of the config of the plane, right? Because of the way that the door 2 is kind of the separator between first and business, right?
And, just buying new seats and taking old seats out and everything, that they aren't cheap hardware.
But they can use those seats on other planes, right? Those seats they'd be pulling out are the ones they're using on the 330s and the 77Ws.
Yeah, hold them as spares, maintenance spares. I mean, or on future retrofits. I don't know.
Who knows? Maybe they'll go the Delta route and start buying used planes from third world countries.
Let's be fair. United's doing the same thing. I don't know. I guess we can't. Are we considering Panama third world?
I think Panama's really like second world.
Okay. Have we decided where China really is?
No-name airlines out of China? I think that's third world category.
Okay, fine. And when you want a 752 and you need it now.
But I mean, back on the topic of Delta, though.
And just so I confirmed, guys, it is 3 of 8 daily San Francisco flights will be 767s, and 4 of 9 LA, or 10, depending on the day, will be 767s.
This is on Delta?
Delta, yeah. That's the new expanded service for transcons.
But, that's the thing, right? Is there really this much demand in the LA, San Francisco, and New York markets?
And so this is sort of what we were discussing, and it's, we're talking, we started with collusion, so,
right.
And how they're all cutting, and yet this is one where, have they all agreed to increase capacity in this case? I doubt it, but JetBlue seems to think it's making money, to the point that it's willing to push its planes a little harder and converted 5 future A321 orders to add more service both in New York and in Boston.
Well, I think JetBlue's in a different boat, though. They have a very different cost structure than the legacies.
Sure, but they're the ones driving the price right now.
Right, absolutely. So the question is, is Delta, and I don't think American is competing so much on price, but Delta is trying to.
Yeah.
So the question is, are they just trying to flood JetBlue out?
Or are they trying to flood Virgin America out?
Is Virgin America even relative with 8 first-class seats?
No, but that's still 30%. The transcon market is something like 30% of its ASMs.
I know.
So, right, and it's the vulnerable one. I don't think JetBlue is vulnerable right now. So, again, with the cost structure and everything else, and Virgin America's fare structure is bizarre and doesn't have the discounts in most cases and all these other things. So,
right, but look at yourself as Delta. Virgin America is just the ankle biter. You'll keep running over them because they just don't have enough inventory to meet the demand. JetBlue's the real threat.
Yeah, I can see that.
JetBlue has the capital, they have the ability, and as evidence as them changing some of their plane orders, they can do this. Virgin can't.
Yeah, I mean, right, Virgin does have some new planes coming, but they're not converting them. They're not announcing even anything special about them.
No. And, I mean, they're barely breaking even right now with the way their configs are, so they can't really pull coach seats out to put premium seats or vice versa.
Yeah, that's
They are the most vulnerable, but they are the smallest threat in that market.
Fair point.
Could you guys see United doing something similar, putting a 7.6 on San Francisco, Newark?
7.6 and maybe one of the domestic 777s they keep threatening with us with.
No, but right, the latest announcement was about that whole all flights from Newark are now going to be flatbeds.
Right.
And it's unclear what the real config of those domestic 777s are going to be.
It's true.
And they were talking about San Fran, Chicago. I mean, certainly it could work. Stephen, I think the answer is if they needed to move it between the cities to otherwise fit the flying patterns, sure.
Yeah.
But I don't see it in general.
Yeah, I'm just wondering because if they're actually going to go to head to head with Delta on this, where Delta's increasing the number of premium seats, the only way for United to do that is to put a bigger plane on the route, right?
Well, there's 2 aspects to the competition. One is frequency, and one is having enough seats on each plane. And so, the United PS planes have 28 business class seats. Is that right?
Yep.
How many does a Delta 7.6 have?
26.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Interesting.
So no, I don't think United needs to put a 7.6 on.
Well, that answers the question. Where you been, Foz? You could answer that one 5 minutes ago.
I'm sorry. But United has their own problem where they don't have enough capacity, so they might put a 7.6 on.
Capacity
just
for
general.
In general?
In general. They have a shortage of premium seats on the transcon markets.
Interesting. Hey, I don't know where the transcon market's going to go. I mean, I'm hoping that we see some cheap prices. There was some lower fares out there for a little while, and I don't think they're still around, but there was some $1,000 business seats out there, San Francisco to JFK for a while.
Round trip?
Round trip.
Yeah, I think the low price point at this, or the low price mark at this point is $1,200, and that's JetBlue's $599 each way, advanced purchase, limited inventory kind of thing.
Yep.
So I wouldn't expect to see it much lower than that, but that's where you should, if you're hunting for the bargains, that's where I'd start looking at.
Yep. Let's talk a little bit about this United labor action, because then I want to talk about Seth's Cuba story. But the labor action that's been announced or alluded to online is some kind of action taking place the day that this show airs.
Sweet.
It's next week. Sorry, it's the week after the show airs. Apologies. Yay. But what's unclear is what exactly the labor action is going to entail. And you brought this up, Seth. You were like, well, what is it exactly? Like, are they going to, picket? Are they going to be giving an informational session out on the floor of O'Hare? No one really knows. It's not.
Right. It could be just work to rule, which is a thing and, could cause some issues. Although it's not clear to me that many of the flight attendants are going beyond sort of the rules in terms of duty days these days anyways. It could be a sick out. I would imagine that a sick out or even, anything vaguely resembling that or a more concerted effort to not actually show up for work would get them a very, very unfortunate reprimand from the mediators and the NLRB, the folks who oversee, that sort of stuff.
Yep.
So it seems unlikely to me that it's going to be anything more than sort of, I don't know. I mean, are they all going to make like weird announcements during boarding? Like, I really don't know when it would be strange. It seems a strange situation.
If you look at their website, it sounds like doom and gloom is coming. But I mean, I don't know. Like you said, we don't really know what's going to happen, but it could be potentially inconvenient or it could be really a non-event.
Yeah. Is this really just them sort of like stirring up noise to get people paying attention to them? And then nothing happens, and like, hey, look, we can, I think one of my favorite posts was someone on Flyer Talk suggesting maybe they'll actually provide great service, which was spectacularly snarky and awful. But I haven't had a bad flight attendant in a long time, but and they happen on all the airlines. But I digress. I don't know. I have no idea what to expect other than to bring a bowl of popcorn over to Flyer Talk that day, because no matter what happens, even if nothing actually happened, they're going to blame it on that.
Yeah, it's most likely going to be like every other labor type action historically, which is some people are going to take it much more personally and take it much more seriously. And some of them are some of the flight attendants are just going to be like, I just need to play the party line but I'm going to keep doing my job. So there's going to be people who have flights that have some sort of impact. There's going to be some people who have flights that don't have any impact.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment.
Yeah, and I'm actually supposed to fly that day, so I'm wondering if I should just book away from United.
Nah, man. The way your luck goes?
that might be the day it all works.
Seriously. This is like, how much worse could it be? You should definitely be there to be able to report live.
Like do a live recording, like a periscope it?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, sorry I'm sacrificing you like that, but that's what I'm thinking.
I mean, I would personally say, like, it probably is not the day to fly United if you really are in a pinch to get where you're going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the more serious answer is yes, I agree with Boz on that.
Oh, well, tell us, Seth. Tell us about Cuba. You said you had a beach story.
I have a beach story, yeah. Cuba's kind of famous for its beaches. It's like the awesome resort vacation place to go. And my trip was not really about going to the beaches. But I flew in and out of Havana, and then while I was in Cuba, I wanted to experience the domestic airlines. And so there's two. I got tickets on one of them based almost entirely on trying to track down old Antonov that supposedly they had flying. My flight ended up being swapped out for an ATR 42, so I was a little disappointed in that. But I picked a route that was about an hour-ish, hour and a half away, and had the Antonov on the schedule. And that was Coco Cayo, Coco Key, if you will, because my Spanish is awful. And I did some digging and did some reading. I was like, okay, well, there's nothing really there, but there's at least a few resorts. There, all the only hotels in the area are these all-inclusive resorts. There's a international airport that caters specifically to flights from Canada and I think one or two from Mexico every now and then, bringing tourists in to visit these resorts. And it turns out the nearest town for locals is 2 hours away. So, like, I'm not sure where any of the employees lived. Maybe there's, like, you know, like bunks somewhere or a dorm or something. But putting that part aside, I fly out. The flight was spectacular and bizarre and interesting in many ways. Among them, there was a flag stop because, you know, it seemed like a good idea at the time, where we stopped at the wrong airport and were told to get off the plane for half an hour. While a bunch of passengers got off and went to that other, it was a different beach. So a bunch of passengers went to that other beach. And I have to go back and look now that I think about it. I don't remember seeing that other destination even on the route map. So I'm not entirely sure about how that happened. But then we got put back on the plane, including one couple that didn't understand the Spanish enough and actually got off and went out with the arriving passengers, even though they were continuing on my flight. But it was really nice, even though they were in the quote, you know, outside security portion of the flight. When everybody out, you know, figured out what was going on, someone just opened a sliding door and let them walk back inside.
Oh, you know.
Didn't make them go through security again. I figured, like, I think it was mostly that the employees just didn't want to turn the security scanner back on. But yeah, so we eventually get out there, relatively uneventful ATR flight, which is nice. And I had read that, like, there's always plenty of taxis available to take you to the hotels. Okay, sure, I'll take a taxi. Walk outside. There was clearly just the 6 of us from the flight. Maybe 8 of us. It was a tiny number of people, so there were no taxis waiting. There was a tour bus that apparently all the other people who were on this flight had been part of some tour group and prearranged the bus. I obviously had not. So I walked up to the guy and I'm like, so, how do I get on the bus? It's like, just pay the driver $5. Okay. No idea where that $5 went, but I don't really care. We drive out, you know, the 20 or 30 minutes from the airport to my portion of the beach. It was not a nice beach. It was just not. I mean, it's built basically on a swamp. Call it the intercoastal or the mangroves or whatever you want to be sort of romantic about it. But it was built on a swamp. So within about half an hour, I was covered in mosquito bites. I got there super early. It was like 10 a.m. probably when we landed finally. Maybe 9:30 by the time we got to the hotel because it was a 6:30 a.m. flight or something stupid like that. And so that meant I was still there in time for breakfast. And I walked in and looked once at the food and I actually tried to eat some of it. And I'm kind of amazed I didn't get sick from the food there.
That bad?
Yeah. And you've seen me eating on the streets of Asia, Stephen. I'm not shy about food.
That says a lot.
This was bad stuff. They had like 3 fancy restaurants that you were allowed during your stay, one each night. Or you're allowed each of them once during your however long your stay was. Mine happened to be a one-night stay, which also confused the hell out of them. But you have to book your reservation for the restaurants a day in advance. And so I'm like, but I'm only here for one night. They're like, oh, well, you can ask, but they're probably full. I'm convinced it's not that they're full, it's that they have to fly in food to stock those restaurants.
Oh, okay.
And so, like, it comes in on the plane I was on earlier that morning, and because I was a late reservation, they didn't have food for me. That makes a lot more sense than the building was full, right? There were maybe 50 total people at a resort that could easily hold 500.
That takes just in time to a whole new level.
Yeah, right?
Did you even eat then?
I did. I had the lunch. The lunch I had grilled chicken that came and was raw. The inside was and I was like, I'm trying to be good here. I'm trying not to be like too much the crazy American, you know, gringo who doesn't really speak the language but hates all of them kind of thing, or hates on all of them. They were actually wonderfully nice people. I don't hate any of them, but like I was trying not to complain about anything. The chicken showed up. I cut into it with a knife and I called the waitress over and I pointed at it. I'm like, this is not right. And she looked at it. She's like, oh, of course not. No. And she like yelled at the chef. Like that one was an easy fix. But they just finished cooking the piece of chicken they gave me. It wasn't like they found a new piece of chicken for me, which again, no need to waste it, but it was different than what I would have expected to experience elsewhere.
You'd have to wait till the next day for them to fly in another piece.
Yeah. Well, fortunately for there, but even that on the lunch menu, you know, it's an all-inclusive, so it's a sort of broad menu. And I think I tried to get the pork, and they're like, no pork today. I'm like, what about this? Nope, none of that today. You can either have chicken or fish. So I picked the chicken. Should have had the fish, I guess. Dinner that night was also pretty bad, and then I was gone before breakfast in the morning. I think I dipped into my emergency stash of snacks, like pistachios or something, that I keep with me, because the food was really that bad. at the resort. One sort of highlight of it was one of the things I had read about the beach area is that in addition to the all-you-can-eat resorts, there's these little fish shacks that are actually sort of public restaurants and that sort of dot the beach. And so I walked maybe 20 minutes down the beach until I found one, and it was a legit, grilled lobster, fresh from the local waters, and beer for $15 with, a huge pile of rice and some shrimp and all sorts of other stuff going on. So I had that around 2:00 for lunch, second lunch, because the chicken I clearly didn't eat a ton of.
Now, will they deliver that to your plane?
I wish. But I asked the guy at the end, in my terribly broken Spanish, how late are you open, or what hour closed? I think I said "Que hora es cerrado." After the third time I said it, he finally understood what I meant. And the answer was basically 6, so I couldn't do it for dinner. But I would have gone back for dinner in a heartbeat if they were open at night. Also, probably not a great idea to be walking alone in the dark on the beach, but whatever. I'm pretty stupid that way. But, it was a crazy scene, and the beach wasn't especially nice. It was a very shallow beach, sort of front to back. None of the resorts, I may have picked a shitty resort. I fully accept that that's possible. I didn't pick the Melia sort of super luxury West Spanish operated one. I picked one of the smaller ones, but even the other ones I saw, which had a few more people, didn't look like they were particularly hopping. Or look particularly nice. The one I was staying at, someone said to me, "Oh, well, it's off season." And my response to that was, is that because it's June or because it's 2015? Right? Am I 10 weeks or 10 years too late? and I legitimately don't know. I mean, the sidewalks to lead from the buildings out to the beach, in some cases were overgrown, cracked, and had grass growing through them at levels that had been years since someone tried to do maintenance on it.
Well, I mean, I know that
whole buildings were shut down. There were stickers over the doors, sealed by the whatever authorities that you can't use this hotel room right now.
And see, what's strange is I work with a number of Canadians who go to Cuba relatively often.
Yeah.
Especially in the wintertime, and they love it. Well, I'm guessing they love it because it's warm.
Yeah, and I think it's cheap, right? I mean, one of the random Canadian, I had that boot. I still had a broken foot when I was there, so I had that boot on my foot.
Yep.
And so one of the Canadian women walking by, who ended up being on my flight out the next morning, or maybe she was on an afternoon flight, I don't know. But she says, in the midst of screaming across the parking lot to one of the guys that she had met during the week about how they were going to get crazy trash drunk that night, because it's all inclusive, so that's what you do. Came up to me and was like, "Oh, are you the guy that got taken away in the ambulance this morning?" I was like, "No." Apparently someone got hit by flying debris from one of the lawnmowers and they had to take him away in an ambulance.
Holy crap.
And I was like, wow, I mean, that's the last thing I'd want to do in Cuba, And her friend was like, "Well, actually, it's not that bad. Remember, Julie or whatever her name was, when you had that a couple of years ago?" And so apparently this isn't the first time the two of them have come to Cuba together. And one of the previous trips, the woman who had started talking to me had apparently gone to the hospital. And she's like, "Oh yeah, the doctors here are great, it's way better than we would have gotten in Montreal."
Yep.
So, and it's not the first time I've heard that they have good medical service there, so maybe that's true, but it was this sort of crazy kind of disconnect in my brain, this, cognitive dissonance of what the hell is going on here? Are you all really here just because the booze is so cheap? Because also it didn't seem that cheap to me. I don't know, the all-inclusive, maybe I'm skewed from Cancun spring break prices from 15 years ago, which is the last time I looked at what an all-inclusive week somewhere costs. But I would think that Cancun would be similarly priced and has options available other than being stuck on this random beach in the middle of nowhere where the other 4 hotels are the only other people for 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. Maybe sorry, go ahead.
The situation just sounds, it just sounds like an odd place. I mean, so do you think it's, they're announcing the embassies, right? We're going to open embassies there, and they're going to open an embassy in the United States.
Yeah.
Do you think, this kind of symbolizes the beginning of tourism again to Cuba from the United States? Do you think things improve? I mean, as soon as people can invest, do you think they're going to just jump on it?
Well, so to me, the big question on the investment is sort of what are the guarantees and what are the hotel and cruise and airline and other companies willing to lose? Because, the big risk with the investment is, Hilton, Hyatt, Marriott, whoever it is, shows up with their $100 million check and they pay a big chunk of that to the Cuban government to license or lease access to a resort. Well, that's the other thing. There were like resorts just along the side of the road that were completely closed down.
But is there infrastructure there to support that? Is the power, sewage, water, all that stuff there to support such a large influx?
No, I don't think so.
So then they have a much larger problem on their hands.
Right. So can it be a phased thing where the first $10 million the Cubans invest in building a new desalination plant or something like that? Maybe. Or a power plant somewhere. But like, there's very little in the way of raw materials.
But let's take a step back, right? Which hotel chain is actually going to be willing to put that kind of money forward, right?
Especially with no guarantees.
Exactly.
And that's the other part of it is like, are they risking a Venezuela situation or, a Cuba from 60 years ago situation where you show up, you invest all this money, you build it, and then the government comes back and says, okay, thanks, and throws you out and takes all your cool toys away.
Yeah.
And I just, I think the reality is there's significant enough potential profit that the answer is yes. Someone's going to show up and invest that money. It's not going to be all at once, and it's not going to be, I don't think it may necessarily going to be a mad rush, but someone will do it. Someone will show up, and maybe it'll be, private folks licensing, what's it called? Not affiliate, but where it's not owned by the property chain, but it's owned by individuals.
Franchise.
Yeah, that's the word. Thank you. Yeah, maybe it's a franchisee that someone comes in and says, okay, I actually have the cash, and maybe they've got local connections or just, whatever, and they're willing to show up and build, 3 hotels next to each other, one in each brand kind of thing, like you see by airports sometimes, where they're all owned by the same investment company. But it seems a crazy risk to me, just having been there. I don't know, man.
I mean, go ahead, Foz.
Well, the other thing is, aside from all that, then there's a lot of work that needs to go into training the people.
Yeah.
To the standards. Like, I remember years ago I went to St. John, and, it's a U.S. Virgin Island. And I got there, and I remember, like, your room's not ready, we were short on staff. I'm like, why are you guys short on staff? Like, we had a big storm. I'm like, you did? It looked perfectly fine, but in St. John, all of the employees come from St. Thomas.
Oh.
And so I guess they had some rain the day before, and it was enough rain that threw all the locals off their game.
Like the ferries weren't running or something?
The ferries were running because I took the ferry over there.
Oh, wow.
But it was very strange, but it's such a small hiccup. Impacted half their staff didn't show up that day, apparently.
Oh, wow.
And that's, like I said, that's a U.S. Virgin Island, so there's a lot of infrastructure there already.
There's still a little bit of sort of island time.
Absolutely, but not like Cuba.
Yeah.
So it's a much bigger challenge for Cuba to attack that.
Yeah, and I will say, when I was back in Havana, the second hotel I stayed in, and even in Cococayo, the hotel staff was actually, fluent English, very nice, very friendly, outgoing, really happy to have me there, and gracious and whatnot. But the infrastructure just doesn't exist. Also, $6.50 an hour for internet.
Phew.
If you can find it.
Oof. Well, so so here comes my thing. You can talk about infrastructure and hotels all you want, but if the beaches are on a swamp and you're getting bitten by mosquitoes and it's just not a fun experience, then part of the reason people go to resorts is to go to the beach.
Yeah.
So the Canadians may show up to drink, but
I will say that as long as you stayed on the beach itself, the wind was enough to keep the mosquitoes off.
It's as soon as you walked off the beach.
Just literally, there's a palm tree line break, and as soon as you got in, they were there to greet you. And also, the wind was strong enough to keep them off, and also blow you away if you weren't careful. It was just I think that was legitimately a seasonal issue. I was there in early June, and it was windy, but I don't know that there'd be necessarily a bug problem on the ocean side, but it was this little isthmus of land with swampland inside, and it was great.
So I hate to tell you this, Seth, but it really sounds like you went to Galveston and didn't realize.
Ouch.
Oops.
You're describing Southeast Texas and Louisiana to a point.
Also not places that I'm really high on visiting.
Oh man, that's a good story. It's good to know. I've wanted to.
Yeah, and listen, I've talked to other people since who've been like, oh no, I went to this beach, I went to that beach, right? If you look at Air Berlin flies a couple flights a week, and they go to Laredo or something like that, which is a little further north and west, closer to Havana. So there are plenty of other beaches out there. It's entirely possible I just picked the wrong beach. I didn't do any research into the beach before picking it. I researched where the airline was flying. And got screwed on that too. So
you focused on the important part, the planes. That's what you focused on.
I was in Cuba as a journalist covering the aviation industry and was not going to violate terms of the U.S. trade embargo currently in place against the nation.
Exactly. I'm
For any federal
100%.
authorities listening, I really mean that.
I'm 100% with you. No,
I really did. I really wanted to see that experience. I'm really bummed I didn't get to fly on the Antonov. Yep. So, it's just, I did go at it with a different angle, but still, this is a place that had a half dozen or so. I think it used to be a dozen, and a bunch are now, literally, they just say permanently closed when you try to book them. And these are like the buildings that they're expecting a Hilton or a Hyatt to come in and renovate and reopen.
So, the challenges in tropical environments, unless they've maintained them while they've been mothballed.
Completely decrepit.
Yeah, you basically have to destroy them and rebuild them because they
even if you maintain them, you have to destroy them and rebuild them every 10 years. It's disgusting.
Yeah. So the question is, why even bother at that point maintaining them?
But they're not maintaining them.
Well, why even leave them standing and not just get rid of them?
It costs money to knock them down.
So really, what they're asking is someone to come in to destroy them and build new buildings and everything that goes with that.
Probably, yeah. You're a pretty smart guy, Foz.
Yeah. And then they can put all the rubbish on a barge and let it float out into the Atlantic until someone takes it.
Yeah. That's the other thing, though, with zero, there's zero construction supplies, resources available on the island. I can, foresee an era, if this construction boom happens, of literally a flotilla of cargo ships coming, Miami to Havana daily, just with as quickly as they can unload them and drive them out into the countryside where they're needed, of construction materials, because it doesn't exist in Cuba right now.
So I guess the question that I have is, clearly, we have an embargo on them, but there are other countries in the world that do not.
Sure.
Why can't they get materials from elsewhere?
Because they have no money.
But that's okay, but why hasn't someone from Europe gone in and built a resort? Or why hasn't, there's enough traffic.
There are some resorts, right? There was a Melia resort, there was an Iberostar resort that I didn't stay at.
Okay.
And, they seem to be having a slightly better time on the beach than my group was, but not enough, and there certainly were still not a ton of people there. Mm-hmm. And when I looked in at the beach, or off the beach into the space there, it didn't look that much nicer from what I could see from the waterfront, but again, I didn't walk through them.
Right.
And so some people have, and there are some nicer resorts, but part of it is also sort of a demand issue of, if there's not enough people coming to go to the beach or go to visit these resorts, then you can't maintain all the properties. And if you, right, it's sort of a chicken and the egg, but if you open up access to Americans and add, a couple 737s a week from various U.S. cities to this airport in Cococaya, which is absolutely configured to handle it, does that extra few hundred people a week all of a sudden revitalize the economy, justify rebuilding some of the spaces, justify having an extra hotel open, reopen one of the random beach lobster shacks, all of those other things, right? What's the volume of traffic you need to sort of hit that tipping point? And then, of course, the other half of that, which is there enough power? Is there enough water? Is there enough of the sewage facilities? Is there enough food supply in the island to be able to maintain all those people?
So I guess the question that I would have is, what is unique to Cuba that someone should pick Cuba over some other place, right?
I can't find it.
And that's the thing, right? People, they spend a fair bit of money to go on their vacations.
Mm-hmm.
They want to go to a known quantity, right?
The only thing that I can tell right now that's attracting people to Cuba is that you aren't allowed to be there.
Yeah, it's Cuba. That's right, that. But to me, that's what everyone says.
But how long is that going to last? That's a novelty.
Yeah. And so the question is that novelty long enough? Does it last long enough for people to show up and put in the money that it's going to take to get them over the hump and built into something that's actually a sustainable and reasonable infrastructure?
Yeah, in reality...
Maybe this island goes to shit and the other ones are better.
They would end up having to run it like a loss leader.
Yeah.
Like, they're going to have to take a loss on it for a while to build up their reputation.
Well, but everybody, right? That's any new market. You got to sort of expect that.
Absolutely, but when you have all these markets in the Caribbean, like when you look at all the different Caribbean islands,
yeah,
many islands have a much better reputation. Many of those islands don't have any chains on them.
Yeah.
So if you're a Starwood or you're a Hilton, why would you pick Cuba
over St. Lucia?
Over St. Lucia or something else?
Yeah, although, St. Lucia does have like 6 sandals or something on it, so, it's not completely chain-free, but it's different.
Right.
And it had a Hilton at one point, but I think it's gone now. It was a spectacular awards day back in the day. So anyway, that's my Cuba. There's more rant about Cuba in general also out there, but also some really cool stuff. I don't want to make it sound like the city was awful. or the country is awful. Everybody was super nice. I had some bad meals at the island resort, but I had some good meals back in Havana. Had some ridiculously cheap meals in Havana that were awesome. Street food there was great. We can talk some more about Havana, I guess, on a later episode. I think we're running a little long here tonight, but it wasn't all awful, and I'm not, completely hating on it. I did get in a random car with a stranger leaving the airport, and I survived, so that's kind of cool.
It sounds like my hitchhiking story. So I think we should just cover one last topic, and that's SkyWest and flying lower and faster. Seth, you were telling me about this, and I had no idea, but it's fascinating to me.
Oh, yeah. I forgot we were going to talk about this. Sorry, I rambled so much about Cuba. So as of June 22nd, the SkyWest CRJ 200, 700, and 900 operational spec has changed. And the company has issued it. It's officially not an FAA requirement, or an FAA sort of whatever. It's company maintained, but it's being helped enforced by the FAA. And there's a cap on altitude of 28,000 feet for the CR2s and a minimum speed being imposed of, I believe it's Mach 0.73 or 250 indicated knots. And I'm not sure how those numbers line up, but I'm doing that from memory. I don't have the document open right now, so I may be a little off on the numbers. I know the 28,000 is right. And I went back and looked over the weekend at some of the numbers when this came to my attention, and it was a whole bunch of flights that used to operate at 32,000 feet were all of a sudden at 28,000 feet.
Interesting.
And it turns out that it seems to be related to issues with high, slow incidents with the aircraft and with the company, which is to say near stalls is what it's being described as. And we're getting away from the specifics and now more into sort of vague insinuation and sort of scuttlebutt as opposed to true facts. But as it's described and what the reactions were, it makes sense. The little bit of research I did into it suggests that the sort of Coffin corner point near speed versus altitude and maintaining lift and whatnot on the CR2s gets real tight at that high in altitude, especially if you try to slow down, which saves fuel, which the company loves. But turns out, flying at the right altitude and the slower speed also puts them at a much greater risk of stall. So they're not allowed to do that anymore.
Interesting.
So I need to stop checking my 3 bags of 70 pounds of rocks on CR2s.
Yes, you should stop doing that, in fact.
I wonder if the stick shaker went off and that's how they knew that they had some close calls.
I would imagine so. Again, I don't know where you'd find reports of that stuff. I feel like a lot of that stuff is sort of internal and or the sort of the anonymous stuff that the FAA or DOT doesn't publicize.
Well, some of it might be in the NTSB reports.
Yeah, we'd have to find them though. The question is, are they being reported as incidents, or are they going through the sort of self-report anonymous bit that doesn't get into those?
It's possible that they might have had a partial stall at some point, which would be an incident.
Yeah. So
right.
I checked AV Herald and didn't see anything, but I'm not sure that would make it into their stuff. So
the NTSB, you can go look through the archives, but I mean they have a lot of stuff that you don't normally hear about.
Yeah, so maybe I'll do that one of these days. When I need.
And you said it was 250 indicated.
I think that's what I saw. Yeah.
0.73. So that's to me that's basically normal cruise.
Yeah, that's the minimum now.
Yeah. So, it's kind of like they're just saying, hey, you fly slower than this and you put yourself at serious risk.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting. So, the way you guys opened the story, I thought they were actually voluntarily dropping the altitude to go faster. But it reminded me back in, I might be dating myself here, but back when Shuttle by United used to run, and they used to have flights between San Francisco and LA every 15 minutes. Now, if you think about it, that's not possible to run a schedule that's reliable and on time with that frequency. So what they'd end up doing is they'd fly at 15 and 18,000 feet between the two because it would cut 20 minutes off the flight time.
Interesting. Because they didn't have to spend as much time climbing.
Right. And you have less surface area to cover because back then fuel was cheap.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you this, from Milwaukee to Chicago, it's a 7-minute flight at 7,000 feet.
Yeah, and it's right there's somewhere it makes sense to never get up that high. But I was looking, I think I did L.A. to Redmond, Oregon. Mm-hmm. Is that a place? Is that
yes,
right?
It is.
Okay, so that was one where I looked, and if you look, there's an American has been flying that has some SkyWest CR2s flying that route, and you can absolutely see it changed on the 22nd.
Wow.
The 21st it was higher, and the 22nd it was lower. There's a few I found. There was some Phoenix to Palm Springs, maybe, or Denver to Palm Springs, maybe, something like that. I looked up a bunch of them and then cross-referenced that with the note from the purported note from the chief pilot indicating this. So it's absolutely happening.
Denver, Burbank, Denver, Ontario would be some good ones to look at.
Yeah. And right, the other part of this is, the challenges with it is you're talking hot and high season where, you've got the convection of heat coming off the planes, especially and whatnot. You got more storms and you can't fly over them.
Yeah.
That's bad as a customer.
Well, I mean, look, they're flying Denver, Milwaukee on a CR2. That's almost a 3-hour flight.
That's shitty. I wouldn't do that.
And
I'd like to say I couldn't do that.
And that's like the thunderstorm. That's like Thunderstorm Alley between the two. It's like, well, yippee-ki-yay. You can be flying around it now. So it turns it into a 3.5-hour flight.
Well, I imagine they could fly higher, but they have to go weight restricted, right?
Well, no, they're not allowed to fly above 28,000 feet.
Okay, at all.
Yeah, period.
Okay. But, I mean, how many storms do you see between 28 and 32,000?
There's some big ones coming off the Rockies.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
And even if it's not the full storm, I mean, if you're 5,000 above it instead of 7,000, does that matter? I mean, it's just, I can imagine, or even not even a storm, just where's their clear air? If everybody else has clear air 4,000 feet up and you don't, right? They also have the vertical spacing issues.
Yep.
Where at the lower altitudes you have the greater vertical spacing, which makes it makes it a more challenging dispatch environment for ATC.
Yeah.
And the interesting bit of the story that I got originally was included a note from an air traffic controller saying basically they were trying to figure out what was going on and like giving the pilots higher clearances, and the pilots were refusing them but not explaining why.
Interesting.
Unable.
So, basically.
I wonder if this is going to accelerate the demise of the CR2.
One can hope.
Yeah,
I know.
A boy can dream.
I mean, they're exiting pretty quickly.
Yeah, but it's not fast enough.
It'll never be fast enough.
Exactly.
I had an interesting conversation with a pilot the other day about his favorite planes and least favorite planes, and the CR2 is definitely up there for him. He's a regional pilot, and then he said that worse than that was the Saab 340. He said the thing was just a piece of junk to fly.
It is a brutal ride.
So
maybe right up there with the Jetstream 31.
Hey, we have some friends who love that plane.
Yeah, I only got the J-32, I think.
Or the Beechcraft 1900.
I like the 1900. Don't knock that.
The only time I've been in 1900 was there was a curtain instead of a cockpit door and a flat bench in the back.
Yep. The good old days, man. Those were great. Flying into Philadelphia at night, the curtain open, you could see the lights. It was spectacular. All right.
I think that wraps up the show, guys. Foz, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
Twitter as FozM and Tumblr as Not Mundo Surfer.
Oh, ouch. I'm Seth, also known as the Wandering Airman, at WANDRME, or, wander.me, or the other at WANDRME on Instagram or Twitter.
I'm Steven Seagraves. You can find me on badice.com or on Twitter at sseagraves. You can follow the Dots, Lines, and Destinations podcast on Twitter at DotsLines or on our website, moredotsmorelines.com. Leave a comment. Send us a note. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
All right.